Look, nothing that the Chief Minister said in reply really gave us that huge assuaging of concerns. That's the reality. You know, our concerns remain for the reasons I indicated. Look, he tried to allay our concerns on things like boots on the ground, right? But nothing that he said really deals with the points that we raised. So in ultimate form, where does that leave us? It leaves us in exactly the same position that we reached. In other words, that when we made that evaluation of the treaty, we got to the point where we have legitimate concerns about the treaty, but of course, faced with the abyss of no deal, faced with the Chief Minister saying the day before there are going to be catastrophic circumstances, that they've got information that they haven't shared with us, well, then we took a leap of faith towards this agreement, as long as our conditions were met, which was that the amendments to the motion were made so that we, Gibraltar, have the trigger in the future on things that are going to be done under the agreement.
You said that you weren't arrogant to say that you could have negotiated a better deal. Okay.
I didn't say that. I didn't say that we would negotiate a better deal. What I said was that it was arrogant to say the reverse, that we would not together have been able to negotiate a better deal. For the government to take the view, as it has for many years, that to run an exclusionary process of negotiation where it doesn't involve the opposition, that is an arrogant position to say that we can negotiate a better deal on our own. So what I said was, we will never know that had we brought all the minds in the parliament together, we would not have got a better deal.
I stand corrected, but you said it wasn't the deal that you wanted, okay? So what was the deal you wanted?
Well, we wanted a deal that secures freedom of movement, that did not have boots on the ground, that doesn't have the intrusive controls of information that they are giving to Spain, and does and has certainty. If you explore all those points, what is interesting is that, first of all, the government confirmed yesterday that they were not seeking a deal of freedom of movement. They were only seeking a deal on mobility. That on boots on the ground, we were given assurances right up to the last 9 months that they would never do a deal that has boots on the ground. There are boots on the ground. We've got to be realistic and honest with the people of Gibraltar.
But do you accept that Britain isn't a member of the EU, not a member of Schengen? You made a comparison to Liechtenstein. How can Gibraltar have freedom of movement when we're not part of Schengen? Because I said in my speech that under the Schengen Code, there is a provision that says that if you have an international agreement with the EU, which this is, then you can negotiate the right of freedom of movement. Liechtenstein has an agreement of freedom of movement because it has an international agreement with the EU. So if you take the opportunity of negotiating an international agreement via the UK with the EU, you fall within the article in that Schengen Borders Code that envisages that the ability to negotiate that right of freedom of movement. In fact, what happened was that the government have set out, as they confirmed yesterday, that they did not seek the right of freedom of movement. I think that's a mistake because you know, we had the right of freedom of movement when we were in the EU for as long as we were there. So why not? It would have given us the right to reside. It would not have made us subject to the 90-day rule. It would have given us the right to work in the EU. So our citizens, I think, would have had a more expansive set of rights. So I think that was a mistake. And so that's the view that we took on that specific issue. Okay, you've said that this week that the government hasn't been honest about boots on the ground, but do you accept that the starting position 5 years ago is never going to be the final position after 5 years of negotiating? Look, my complaint with the government is that they're just not honest with the people of Gibraltar. Particularly, sorry, I wanted to add, as Sir Peter Caruana said, that Gibraltar was negotiating from a position of weakness. Yes, and Sir Peter Caruana, in his analysis, says there's boots on the ground. But the government insists on saying there isn't boots on the ground, when in reality, what you've got is, you've got
Their objection on boots on the ground, by the way, was, and I traced it in my speech in Parliament because I wanted to be very accurate in what I said, and I quoted them verbatim, systematically. So Joe Bossano and indeed the Chief Minister, when they objected to Spanish checks in Gibraltar, to Spanish presence in Gibraltar, what you've got, they didn't object to a Spanish officer wearing a uniform in a particular location. They were very precise about objecting to Spanish presence. And what you've got in this agreement is that there will be Spanish officers in Gibraltar at the airport undertaking checks. Yes, will they be within the so-called Schengen shack? Yes, but they will also be outside it doing certain duties. They will be transiting passengers from the port to the airport. There will also be other Spanish officers under the agreement that have the right to come in to do surveillance or hot pursuit. All of that is boots on the ground. There's no point denying it. We've got to be realistic and honest with the people of Gibraltar. That's my plea. And what you don't do, in my view, is tell the people of Gibraltar for 2 or 3 years there will not be boots on the ground. Then they U-turn and not properly explain it. And when this agreement, for context, was published 7 days ago, we rush into a debate and then the government deny that there are boots on the ground. The reality is that people need to be told the truth, and that is the truth.
You spoke in depth in your speech about boots on the ground, whether or not the Spanish police are able to discharge their service weapons in Gibraltar. You talked about, are we going to see flashing cars coming into Gibraltar and all of that. We haven't seen the draft administrative agreement. So when you talk about things like that, can I ask you, have you seen that?
Yes, I have. And let me take a step back, because I think it's important for context. The distinction here is there are things that stem from the Schengen acquis and the Schengen Borders Code, and then where there is police cooperation, and then there are things that are bespoke. What is bespoke in this agreement? What is bespoke is that there are Spanish officers doing checks, the Schengen checks within the airport and the port. That is bespoke. But when you look at the police cooperation provisions, which stem from the Schengen acquis and the Schengen Borders Code, which is this thing about surveillance or joint operations or indeed hot pursuits, you will look at, and this is what I traced in my speech, you'll see in Articles 40 and 41 of the Schengen acquis that there is very specific things and powers that stem from that. And the point I was trying to make is it's very clear that they can carry their weapons in hot pursuit under the code. In surveillance, they can carry their weapons unless restricted by the recipient state. And the point that I was making was 2 things. First of all, the emotional one, that having told the people of Gibraltar that there would not be boots on the ground, it is difficult to overcome that emotion of it being comfortable for any Gibraltarian to see any Spanish officer in Gibraltar exercising any function. But beyond that, when you look at the technical issues, I believe, having seen the administrative arrangements, that there are technical things that they are not restricting Spanish officers from doing when they've got the ability to do so under the Schengen acquis. For example, the carrying of weapons when they are doing surveillance.
Chief Minister said yesterday in his speech, actually what the treaty is doing, or the administrative arrangement is doing, is regulating operations and practices that exist today that you just don't know about, perhaps.
Well, I mean, I thought that was quite surprising, that we have, in effect, unregulated operations. I'm not sure what he was suggesting, whether these were regulated with the consent of the RGP. I mean, if it's to that extent only, well, then that's perhaps another matter, but those questions are best directed to the Commissioner of Police. But if he was suggesting that in some unregulated form things are happening, well, then, of course, that is completely unacceptable, that there should be unregulated operations without the RGP being aware of them. And of course, you can take a cold view about this. And a positive view, because you can say, look, as a matter of our consent...
RGP not being aware, or the public not being aware?
Well, I think...
I don't think he specifically said the RGP weren't being aware.
I'm not sure
what he meant by regulating.
What he meant by that. So that's the point that I'm making. But look, you can take a cold view of this and say, as a matter of our consent and our sovereignty, we are setting up an agreement. We're entering into this agreement whereby we are authorizing these things happening. And this is also a positive thing because Spain, for the first time, is agreeing to receive powers by virtue of our consent and our exercise of our own sovereignty. So you can see this in a positive way. But if it's going to be done properly, first of all, be realistic and honest with people, which is what I think the government are not doing. And be honest that there has been, in effect, a U-turn on certain things. Secondly, let's regulate it in a proper way. And what I was inviting the government to do, when you look at the technicalities of the code, is to tighten those administrative arrangements, because I think they can be tightened on territorial limit. I think they can be tightened on outer limit of how long the surveillance can happen for. I think it can be tightened in terms of also the carriage of weapons. And I think these are important things that need to be considered.
The other issue is the concordat, which we now understand is going to be signed. Are you reassured by that? I know you spoke about this yesterday, about whether it's not legally binding because it's a political agreement, but take us through the steps of what needs to happen to ensure that this is legally binding.
Well, again, taking a step back, if I may. I mean, when I first saw this agreement only 22, 23 days ago now, it became obvious to me that there is going to be, this is not a sort of agreement that's set in stone, these are the decisions and it's over. There is a whole raft of forward-looking, forward-happening events, reviews, evaluations, further decisions that can be weaved in through the specialized committees or indeed the Cooperation Council. It became very obvious to me that it was important for the Gibraltar side to have a handle on the UK decision-making, because otherwise decisions will be made over our head in a way that I said in my speech creates a raft of, in effect, joint sovereignty, and that would be unacceptable to us. So we need to make sure that Gibraltar is in control of the decision-making through the specialized committees and the Cooperation Council. So from day one, I was asking the Chief Minister to provide me with a copy of the concordat, because you will recall, viewers will know, that at the time of the withdrawal agreement, a concordat was entered into. In other words, an agreement between the UK and Gibraltar to regulate the exercise of UK power under the arrangements. So I was asking for that. On Sunday afternoon, for the first time, I received a draft of it, but it was obvious it was a draft. That led us to proposing those amendments to the motion to condition the ratification vote, to condition the ratification to the signing of a concordat, so that Gibraltar has the levers, has the eject button under the agreement.
Are you surprised that concordat has come about so late in the day? Would you have expected it to have been signed sooner?
Yes, I am surprised. Although I take at face value the things that the Chief Minister said, that eyes are on the elsewhere because of the international crisis and so on. I get that. But I would have thought, I have to say, that given that this agreement has been ongoing for years, given that there was a political declaration last June 2025 that the negotiations were over politically, and that the legal negotiations ended on the 12th of December 2025, I would have thought that someone would have turned to the drafting of the concordat, because those negotiating would have known that it was obvious, as it was to me within days of reading the draft agreement, that it was important to have the Gibraltar levers on the UK decision-making powers.
Mr. Azopardi, I'm going to pick you up on one thing that you said about the Chief Minister having said in the past, and the GSLP having said in the past, there'll be no boots on the ground, but now you say that there are boots on the ground. Well, the GSD said initially that it would call for a referendum on this treaty, and you've moved away from that position.
No, it's not that we've moved away from it, but it's because we're not in government and we didn't negotiate it.
But you could still call for it.
Well, our commitment was, I mean, let's look at the context on the decision on that. But our commitment was, if we had been elected in 2023, we would have negotiated a safe and beneficial agreement, we would have put that to a referendum. That was our commitment to people. We weren't elected to government. We're not going to start seeking to compel the government that didn't have that commitment to, or condition the motion that would have been politically disingenuous, I have to say, to try to do that on this moment. We did have that commitment in 2023. Our point now is different. Our point was we've got to evaluate what this is and compare it to no deal. We don't have information about what no deal means, although instinctively we have a sense that it wouldn't be good for Gibraltar. We don't have economic analysis that the government has had about the value or otherwise of this agreement. So we're being asked to take a blind vote almost on things that we think we have misgivings on, where there has been U-turns on boots on the ground, but we're being asked to do this in short order. We're given the treaty 22 days ago, but asked not to speak about it publicly until it's published. It's published last Thursday. We then have a meeting with our executive 72 hours later on the basis that we're going to be asked to vote 2 days later. The people of Gibraltar had 5 or 6 days to consider this before the vote. Based on that, our own evaluation and our own misgivings, yes, it was an agonizing decision. But if we had to take a leap of faith, we take a leap of faith towards the agreement despite our misgivings, where we have many, because that is the reality of what we face today. I said on radio that the government took us to the cliff edge, publishes the agreement, and then asks for an immediate vote. It wasn't a very fair process.
I'm going to ask you a hypothetical question. If we didn't have the pressure of the 10th of April implementation date because of the EES system coming into force, would you have taken a different position in Parliament this week?
Well, I think the problem is not the 10th of April necessarily. The problem is that, of course, this is not negotiable anymore. You know, it's presented as the political declaration. The political process ended in June. The legal agreement has negotiation closed. This is now published as this is the EU-UK deal. This is not open for negotiation. So it's not. I mean, we can evaluate it. We can say I don't like the intrusive economic controls because I think that there is a possibility of abuse by Spain, and you know. Traditionally, we don't trust Spain. So can they use those economic levers to harm Gibraltar? We're worried about that. Are we emotionally, do we find it difficult to consider Spanish officers here in Gibraltar? Yes, we do. But, you know, faced with those choices on a non-negotiable basis and faced with no deal, we take a leap of faith towards this deal. And I made very clear yesterday, and this is quite important, I think, for viewers, that a future GSD government would make the best of a deal that we have misgivings on. In other words, we would implement it in government and make the best of this deal. And I wanted to make that clear in my speech, not just because of the misgivings that we were expressing, but so that people know what our attitude would be if we were elected to government.
Is there anything you might seek to change? And I ask you that question because when Labour came in, it said on its agenda was to reset its relationship, Britain's relationship with the EU. Is there anything that you would immediately come to mind that you would change should the GSD win the next election?
Well, I think there's a number of points that I'd make. First of all, let's make it work, because I think there are concerns, even on this framework, about how this is going to work. So let's make it work. I mean, you speak to the business community and they are concerned about the lack of information, their frustration, their anger on certain things because they've not been properly consulted. I am sure, like everything in life, that as soon as you start implementing this agreement, things will emerge that you want to tweak and improve or vary. So those things are, the first step is to make it work. Then beyond that, of course, there's going to be an evaluative process after 4 years. There's a clause that talks about a 4-year review and ongoing reviews. In the context of those reviews, I'm sure things will be considered by all sides of this agreement about what they would like to change. That's a matter for the future. But I think step one is to try to make it work in the manner it has been tried to be conceived. and then take it from there. But what I do think is that, look, I have concerns about it. We've spoken about boots on the ground a bit, but I have concerns about the economics, because we don't know how this is going to work. This is a recalibration of the economic model in relation to goods, things that we've never done before. We've never really had free trade in this way with Spain and in the hinterland. We're giving them economic controls about real-time access to computer information in certain areas. Spain have, for Schengen, they've got powers to decide things like short-stay visas or residence permits. Is that going to be exercised in a manner that is abusive and harmful to our economy because, for example, they don't want a trade delegation to come from a visa requiring non-EU state? I don't know. These are things to be tried and tested in the future. I'm concerned about the lack of certainty because of the 12-month break clause. But, we take a leap of faith. We're going to try to make it work from the opposition. I've said yesterday that we are willing to work together, collaboratively, in cooperation with the government on these issues and in future in government as well. And
has the government signalled to you that it is willing to work with the GSD on this?
Well, no, it hasn't. But look, the government brings us in to the extent that bringing in means anything by showing us a copy of the draft treaty 22 days ago. That's not proper. Look, the government has a chance. It hasn't brought us in at all. In my view, they're in government for now. It's up to them if they want to involve us more in the implementation process. But what I can tell you is that I think this is an important enough issue for us to work at least a bit better on certain aspects to improve the lot of our community and the future for Gibraltar. And certainly in government, I would handle these things in a very different way.
And in terms, finally, of the huge administrative burden that is coming our way now, the role of the opposition, are you up to scrutinising and holding government to account, because there's going to be a vast amount of changes coming up and some of the issues that you mentioned yourself?
Well, we're certainly up to the job. I think we're showing it in dealing with this. At the end of the day, they've had 5 or 6 years or whatever to consider these issues, and we have spotted flaws within 21 days. So I think we're up to the job. I think it would be easier to get to have more scrutiny if we were given more information. So we're lacking in the economic analysis. But I do agree with you in the point that you make that this is not just about the agreement as it stands today. It's also about the future, about how this agreement is changed and how the different decisions are taken in the future. And that brings also a huge implementation, administrative and resources burden for Gibraltar. It's very clear, not just in security, but in terms of actually managing the implementation process. And that is going to be center stage as we go forward.
Mr. Azopardi, let's end this interview on a positive note. What are the benefits that you see from this treaty?
We've spoken a lot about the challenges, but I accept, and I did, I think, in my speech on Tuesday, I gave, I thought, a measured view of what the benefits versus the challenges are. And there are benefits in this agreement. Look, we're going to have mobility across Europe, subject to the 90-day rule, but of course, the fact that we have borderless travel, that we're going to be exempt from the EES, the fact that we can travel throughout Europe, that is a big plus for the people of Gibraltar. I think that is very important. Of course, it goes together with the new economic model, because you can't achieve personal mobility at the border if there's going to be a customs checkpoint. You remove the police, but not the customs, and therefore they had to do this economic model. And that brings also pressures for some businesses, because there's going to be winners and losers, but it also brings opportunities in the economy, because for the tourism industry, for example, side by side with a big investment program on the tourism product of Gibraltar, it allows the entry of tourists to Gibraltar. So I think it also brings good economic opportunities as long as we manage the challenges that lie ahead.